Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Alexandra Ventura, the marketing manager at Navozyme. Navozyme was founded with a mission to enhance lives and to facilitate decarbonization via innovative technology solutions that raise the safety, the productivity, and the reputation of the global maritime industry. At Navozyme, we have developed cutting-edge technology solutions for complex maritime certification processes related to ship registry, port clearance, marine pollution, and seafarers training certifications. In today's session, we have the privilege to have with us an expert on digital identity, Ian James Myles. With more than 20 years of experience in Silicon Valley as a designer, developer, and technologist, Ian will share with us the latest technologies advances in digital identity and will address some of the challenges surrounding it, especially when it comes to data privacy and data protection. I encourage you to take this opportunity to ask all the questions that you may have. We'll keep an eye on them to bring them up during the short Q&A session. Now, without further delay, I would like to welcome Ian Myles.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you, Ian, for being here with us today. And well, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for setting this up. I'm just going to do a screen share, and then I'll ask for another thumbs up that you can see my screen, and I'll proceed. Can everybody see?
Everything is perfect.
Okay, so I've got about 20 minutes. I'll push through this quite quickly. I'll try to speak clearly, and I'll happily take questions. We've got 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. I've been living in Singapore for the last 8 years. I've just moved back to California about 7 months ago, and I'm plugging into a lot of things that I've been missing and seeing what's going on in the landscape. As it relates to digital identity, it's almost an existential question for anyone who follows a Christian faith. There's almost a comic moment when you die and you're supposed to identify yourself and explain yourself when you get to heaven. And of course, one of the questions might be, what's the first name of your pet? It's a very standard question inside of a bank. But for anyone who's 30 or I think maybe 28 or younger, the question of identity on the internet goes all the way back to the earliest days of the internet. And this cartoon from 1993 is a legend amongst identity circles. It does make me smile a lot because we've come a long way up to 2015, where an organization called the National Security Agency knows an awful lot about everybody who's on the internet. There's a lot in these circles that is comic, and there's a lot in these circles which is quite disturbing. The real problem with humanity for me is this difference between the rate of technological evolution and the rate of human evolution. And this is really well summed up in a quote from E.O. Wilson, an American social biologist. It's very, very clear that humans are not evolving at the same pace as technology. And I'll circle back on this at the end of my talk as to what it is I think we need to do here. I've been involved in identity through fintech. I hosted my own event in Singapore at a fintech festival, looking at the challenges in fintech and banking, and pulled together an enormous number of people to start asking questions around this. There's always more questions than answers. And in different cultures, in different places, different industries, it's a different level of challenge. One thing we knew back in 2017 was that the issue of the age was becoming control and use of users' data. That starts with how you're identified, how you're authenticated, and it's just blossomed as a problem that continues to become a challenge. It's continuing to scale. These numbers are a little bit dated, but they give you a sense of perspective. The rate at which data is being harvested is going exponential. There's still great inequity in the world when it comes to deployment of technology to take advantage of the many great things the internet has to offer. 25% of the world does not have a legal identity. And if you don't have a legal identity, you can't participate in a banking system. You can't participate in a regular or a regulated economy. But strangely, 80% of humanity's got a smartphone, 80% of adult humanity. These are predictions made by the economists. And the last time we looked at it, there was well over 5,000 AI startups. So in this blend of AI identity and data, there's an enormous amount of activity to try and figure out and take advantage of information that's becoming available. In very, very simple terms, this is a Monetary Authority of Singapore definition. They like to know three things when you're trying to make a payment. They want to know who you are, and there's ways to confirm that. They want to know where you are, because location informs the jurisdiction that you're standing in. It also confirms, was Ian at the coffee shop when he bought a cup of coffee, or someone else using his identity to legally gain a cup of coffee. So location is a key component for MES. And then the other issue is intent. Did I express intention to buy, or is some other agent acting on my behalf, trying to procure things using my money for their gain? So those are the types of things a monetary authority is interested in. The credit card industry in general likes to have one of three things. They like you to have something, they like you to know something, or they like you to be something. And each one of these can be satisfied in a different way with different technologies. Making this deck available to everybody. After I finish, you can download, have your PDF, and there's lots of useful links where there's a little bit more expansion on a variety of different topics. So, but just to keep things moving, it's fair to say that the internet is complicated and it's very, very geopolitical. Regulation cannot ever catch up with innovation. It's always going to be arriving after the scene and trying to figure out what went on, what needs to happen next to prevent, further criminal activity. And that's just a fact of life. What is important is in your organizations, you should certainly appoint an identity officer. Does not have to be C-class, but it should be someone who's responsible for explaining your organization's position in terms of general data protection, how your organization is gathering and sharing and distributing information. There are great assets out there, some great companies producing very, very useful little infographics to help educate people inside your organization about how data is gathered and managed and shared. I like these two in particular. I would encourage everybody to follow the Cybersecurity Hub on LinkedIn. They put out great little infographics explaining how devices are harvesting data around you. And the infographic here from Clario shows what organizations are harvesting the most information about you. No surprises there that Facebook's right up at the top. They've certainly been in the news a lot for how they gather and use their data. And that's a whole presentation in and of itself. There's a couple more links to articles in here. I find Hacker Noon well worth a read. I like what Christian Kameir has to say about digital identity as a useless metaphor. He argues that identity requires consciousness, and that's a lead into the next couple of things I'm going to talk about. What was interesting having SecureKey come and talk at our conference, a very large Canadian firm that offers federated authentication systems, is that their own surveys have concluded that a lot of people on the internet have hundreds of what they call identities. They're actually just logins. So the information I would use to confirm myself on one website will be different from another, different from another. People are wise to use different email addresses and passwords because that's the paradigm of the age. But that essentially means you're servicing each one of these identity systems within each one of these organizations. This is a quote that informs me a lot. Ross Anderson is famous for saying, once you've solved for authentication, the rest is just accounting. Increasingly, more and more of the internet is going to be machine driven. certainly financial services, financial systems, anything numerical, banking, accounting. It's going to be machine driven. There'll be less and less humans involved in that. But the tricky bit is where humans and technology come together. If you go back enough in time, human interaction has been a very analog experience for millennia. It's been human to human. Banking was human to human, and sentient beings having a conversation. It was nice to catch up with Anjani earlier on. He knows I am Ian Myles because we have a history, we have a past. He recognizes me. So he's using his analog experiences to confirm this is Ian Myles. But as we move forward, humans are interacting with bots in different ways. And I've called out a distinction here between bot to human and human to bot. It's really who's initiating the conversation. So human to bot would be me calling a bank and trying to get information. And bot to human would be, someone robo-calling me or a machine-driven aggressive sales. And right now, they're pretty disappointing in terms of chat, but they are getting better. What we're seeing making profound leaps is that deep fake videos are really unsettling because the quality of the computer graphics is quite compelling. Even the synthesis of somebody's voice, whether it's a politician, and natural language processing, which is one huge sector of AI, is just getting better and better. I'm just going to take a minute here. We're at about the halfway mark to have a quick look at an AI solution. I'm giving you a couple of links. This is one of the most amazing things I've seen in my 7 years back in Silicon Valley, 7 months back in Silicon Valley. OpenAI must be followed. Check it out. It's really, really impressive. I put in a couple of YouTube links there. They're about 15 minutes long. It just really took my breath away. I've included it in my courses that I teach. But I would draw your attention to this little staircase here, the evolution since 2019 up to 2020. If you look at the number of parameters that are being used to inform natural language processing, it's really a breathtaking leap to go from 1.5 billion to outperforming credible companies like NVIDIA and Microsoft to GPT-3, which is a third version of this platform, 175 billion parameters. Now that's really, really profound and significant. It's the most powerful language model ever built. And it's worth taking a little bit of time to understand what's coming down the pike in terms of AI and how AI is going to be used to navigate identity. Where it gets really complicated is when humans aren't in the mix and it's a bot-to-bot conversation. How are we going to give up and delegate responsibility to that? There's a nice Forbes article here about when the IoT becomes the AOT, which is the autonomy of things. And as it relates to maritime and vehicle, it's just a very, very simple insight. There's not going to be homogeneous systems. There's going to be different systems that need to interact with each other. And in the US landscape, you could look at vehicular traffic. I don't imagine robots in humanoid form driving a little vehicle like my cartoon on the left. But clearly, different players will need to be able to drive on different roads in different cities, in different states, with different laws and different regulations. That's also going to apply in maritime. All things maritime at many levels, large and small, will be autonomous activities, and they're going to be increasingly bot-driven or AI-driven, and they increasingly will have to have identities and permissions as to where they can come and go or how they're allowed to move around. So it's definitely worth thinking about identity systems that are not just human, but also technological. I look to the European Union for the highest authority in the world on this. There's very, very few organizations that could hold Microsoft to task or Google to task. And they have been driving the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And so I would encourage everybody to hold that standard as the highest. This is underscored by firms I respect. Company called Scream in Singapore is an AI firm that does a lot of identity and authentication using AI. They could see 10 years ago that cookies would at some point no longer be allowed. And so they've found ways of working around, and they're underscoring the importance of GDPR compliance. GDPR varies greatly from country to country, but it's worth working to the highest standard you can find if your organization is big enough to support that. If your organization is not, then you'll have to go to other means. I am perturbed by Brexit. I am perturbed that Britain is going to make deviations away from general data protection regulation that's coming out of Europe. I'm not 100% convinced, as clever as they are and as great as they are, that they're going to do a better job than the EU. But that's just part of the geopolitics going forward. Each country has the right to, pursue its best interests, but just observe that not everybody's agreeing on standards. So there's going to be interoperability issues wherever there are differences. I also look to the National Institute for Standards and Technology, also known as NIST. They write the definitions and the guidelines for two-factor authentication, which is using one-time passwords. They've identified flaws and breaches. They're responsible for deploying solutions. So that's a good authority. It's a US authority. Generally, when you look around you, you will see governments like Estonia. Singapore's just launched Affinity. These are large national level identity systems. They are dwarfed by the Indian identity system, which is called Aadhaar. It's just the sheer numbers. Estonia, I think, is 1.3 million people. Singapore, with all of its foreign workers, might be 6 million, trying to get to 8. And so nation states feel the need to stand up identity systems. But also there are industry groups like the FIDO Alliance, which started way back in 2013, I think I put here. Most of the activity I've seen, because of my fintech background, has been driven by financial services. Financial institutions really have to understand historically what they would call KYC, know your customer. They've got self-evident motivations for wanting to make sure they know who they're lending money to, interacting with. So these are two entities. The ID company in Edinburgh does a pretty good job to help people figure out peer-to-peer lending. Yodlee is a massive platform built out in the US. It must be 20 years old by now, with thousands and thousands of banks on the back end that can do some financial profiling for individuals and corporations alike. So there's lots of links here in the deck for you to enjoy at your own pace another time. I think just in closing, we'll move through the next 3 or 4 slides in the next 2.5 minutes. The most dominant platform out there is Android. There's more than 3 billion active, but you have to know and believe that every Android has malware on it. And the security specialists I talk to, every single app that you put out on Android has to have its own security shell so that you've got a secure transmission from within the app to wherever you're transmitting data. It's free, it's ubiquitous, it's a vehicle for lots and lots of fraudulent activity. It's phenomenal. This map shows you its dominance. iPhone is a lot stronger. There's an old Silicon Valley joke that says with Apple, you'll pay for your privacy. With Google, you'll pay with your privacy. So just bear that in mind when you're making some security choices. One of the most interesting things I've seen this week, and you can see the date up here in the corner, September the 18th, is Microsoft, which is the most, after the Pentagon, Microsoft is the most attacked entity on the planet from hackers. They are moving away from passwords. And username and password, which is really just our login, it's not really our identity per se, but it's what we call our user ID. It's really quite profound. I'm not quite sure what this means. I've yet to figure it out myself, but I have had my business accounts on Microsoft hacked from the inside, and my Office 365 ceased to function. And these are things that were beyond me as a small business owner to take care of. So there's just inherent vulnerabilities. If you work for large organizations, you can have dedicated security professionals taking care of your stuff. But when you're independent small companies, some things are just beyond your ability. So as a measure, I tend to default to Apple. It's just more robust and more secure. Basic hygiene is something that's advocated. It's just be sensible about how you use and share your information. But this is a very, very interesting development from Microsoft, and it's fresh news yet to be figured out. Just to wrap up in the last less than a minute, what I've seen in the US, this is a standard web login, which I'm just going to unpack for you here. EDX is an educational platform I like to use, and the historical methods for logging in would be username and password. And it's been around since the dawn of time, and it's flawed, and everybody wants to get beyond passwords. There are bespoke solutions which will be custom built by organizations. They will never have great ease of use because organizations don't spend on usability the way these large entities down at the bottom are. Sometimes referred to as the FANGs, which is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. That's really just an investor bundle. But they're very, very dominant technology platforms, and they do spend a lot of money on usability. I used to run usability at Chase in North America, and I had a team of 45 people just making sure our apps and our websites were more usable. And you can imagine for a bank, security was everything. Just to close out, the thing that is most important to take away from this is that usability, keeping the human centered in all of your thinking and calculations really, really matters. It's the one thing that you must take control of and then work back towards the technology. You can set out to design something, but if you don't submit your thinking to usability testing, you may be designing something that nobody can use. And if your solution isn't usable, it doesn't get used. Doesn't matter how clever it is at the back end, it's got to be easy for humans on the front end. So with that, I'd leave you with the wisdom of Steve Jobs. You've got to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology, not the other way around. Don't just upgrade your technology, upgrade your people. That's me. Thank you very much for listening. I've put a link up to some courses that I teach on design and AI. Digital identity and usability is part of that course in the context of AI. And I'm happily going to take some questions from anyone who's still with us.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's been a very interesting keynote. Ian has offered to share this presentation with all the present. So we will be adding the link to this presentation to the email that we will send you tomorrow with a recording also of this session. So now let's go to the Q&A session. Let me start by saying that right now there is a lot of fear and this speech around that when you are on internet, you cannot have privacy. Maybe because most of us use Facebook, Instagram, and we have seen the news, but let me ask, digital identity and privacy. Can we have both?
You just need to proceed carefully. For example, I still like to use cash to make payments because it's anonymous. If you're using, I built one of the first smartphone payments platforms in North America, and I figured out really early on, it's going to be a messy thing for about 10 years because people are harvesting data and people really want to know how you spend your money. It's much more compelling to know what people spend their money on. I can tell you I like tea, but you can see from my expenditure patterns, I'm drinking a lot of coffee. And once you know how people spend their money, it's to me, that's a level of privacy that's just gone a little bit too far. So I like to use cash. I use mobile money platforms when I have to. They're certainly convenient and handy, but I don't use them for everything. So I'm just very, very cautious. I think basic hygiene is use a variety of different platforms. Do not just use one platform. I recently stopped using WhatsApp, and I'm committed to Facebook. I think it's a phenomenal platform, but I'm very, very careful about what I put on Facebook. I think use a variety of technologies and use a variety of different identities and profiles as well. People are going to be harvesting your information. They're going to be using machine-driven technologies to gather that. It's going to happen if you're going to participate in the internet. We just need to look for authorities like the European Union to help regulate companies to be a little bit more ethical about how your data is used.
And on that line, so how the technology can help us to stay in control of our data, and how does it work with digital identity?
Pay for privacy. So Apple's better than Android, generally speaking. Use encrypted apps. I think after WhatsApp was acquired by Facebook, there was a massive jump in a German platform called Threema. And Threema is a subscription-based app that's encrypted, not just in transmission, but on either end. And that became popular in Germany at a time when it was revealed that US was listening to Angela Merkel's phone calls. So the Germans decided they wanted to pay for privacy. And so Threema is one of the many encrypted apps out there. There is Signal, there's Telegram, there are others. But you need to pay for privacy. If you're using anything free on the internet, you're the product. Okay. Nothing is free. You pay for your privacy or you'll pay with your privacy.
I think that we all need to revisit some of the things that we are using.
It's basic hygiene. You've just got to think, okay, what am I using? How am I using it? Try going a day without Google. It's really hard. You can slowly remove yourself from platforms that you feel are going too far or suddenly too invasive. Be very, very careful of things like Amazon Alexa. Be very, very careful of having microphones and open cameras in your house. There's a lot of privacy issues around smart homes. There's a lot of great security issues as well, but you just need to proceed carefully.
So we have a question coming from the audience from Captain Stephen Thomas, and he's asking, what are your thoughts about sharing systems such as the ECDIS system on the ships? Because IMO specs don't allow individual login, so they all end up sharing the same login. So
yeah. The IMO needs to change its position on that. Even DBS Bank in Singapore, I have to log in with my company login, and I have my individual login, and then I have to have a PIN. We need to know who is on the system, not just one of 300 people is on the system. Nefarious activities on the internet come from anonymous places. And so if you don't know who is on your system, that is a system flaw.
And well, we are running out of time, but just to close it, do you think that decentralized digital identities can be the solution for keeping the personal data private?
I have religion on decentralized everything. Decentralized and distributed. Any large singular repository is a magnet for hackers. You're just going to draw people in because I can get a lot of goodies if I can crack that one place. But if your identity system is distributed and decentralized, the breach would be a lot smaller. You're actually less attractive to hackers if they can only get just smaller quantities.
So, well, we have come to the end of the session, but thank you very much, Ian, for being with us today. And
My
also
pleasure.
thank you to the audience for connecting with us. We hope you enjoyed this session and you have found it interesting.